Well, it says we're live, but I'm just going to refresh and double check.
Yeah, it's on the
Oh, it's on yours? Perfect. Well, then
it's on the computer.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, great.
There we go.
Yeah, so look, we're coming from 3 different countries, so maybe my computer's got a slight lag behind Australia and America. So welcome anyone that's new here. You might not recognise all our faces. I'm Daniel from Devon & Sons Guitars. We've got Mark Gutierrez here and Brad from BB Guitars over in Australia.
Howdy-o.
Fantastic. And Brad, first time joining us in the new time slot. So what we're trying to do with this new time slot is, I mean, it's so hard to find a time that works for everyone. But this kind of means I'm staying up a bit late. It's end of the day for Mark, and it's early morning for Brad.
Yep. Oh, before we start, Daniel, when we were off camera, you were talking about the link you sent about the guitar teacher, and I had thoughts about teaching guitar that I wanted to express. Is that okay? Anyway.
Yes, let's do it. Shall I
All
give
right.
people context to that?
Oh, sure.
So I sent Mark a link to a guy that appeared on my Instagram feed. I'll see if I can find him while I'm talking. And he, it came up because he basically had a clip of a, I think Berkeley put it out. It was to show off the quality of their guitar teachers that you'll get if you go and study on their course. And he basically laughed at and slagged off every single one of them. Now, I thought it was a little bit harsh, but he then went into reasons behind it all. And I started looking at some of his other clips. And in the other clips, he was breaking down why it's really important, if you want to learn from a good teacher. And if you're paying big bucks, you want to make sure you're getting the big teachers in. So I've got thoughts on that as well. But Mark, what did you want to say about it? I'll tell you his name.
What I was going to my reaction was going to be, I would be a terrible guitar teacher, right? Here's why. So has anyone ever seen the movie The Karate Kid? I'll break it down for you, right? Mm-hmm. So there's this little skinny kid and he wants to learn karate. So he meets this amazing, older, Japanese man. And he says, sure, I'll teach you karate, but first you got to paint my fence. And then he paints his whole fence. He's like, okay, can we learn karate? He's like, nope, you got to wash my cars. Right. And then the kid's like, okay, I washed your cars. Can we learn karate? He's like, nope, you got to wax the cars now. Right. So what he was doing was he was basically developing muscle memory. Right. And I believe that guitar, a lot of it, maybe 50% of it is muscle memory. Right. Mm-hmm. And you can get away with doing those type of exercises where you're just painting a fence, washing a car, buffing the car. And if you can get all that muscle memory in, you can learn technique. And I'll give you a real world example. I was trying to learn how to thump like Tosin Abasi when Tosin Abasi just first, years ago, right? When he first, released that stuff. And I could never do it. But I kept trying and I kept failing and I kept trying, I kept failing until I developed something. It just clicked. It was like one day, I could thump. And I realized what it was just muscle memory. It's like you have these muscles in your fingers and they never get used in very specific, unique, novel ways until you do that motion over and over and over and over again. So I thought to myself, if I was ever a guitar teacher, I would kind of push the whole muscle memory thing. But I promise you that would kind of totally fail because if I was teaching kids, parents would be paying me to basically have them paint my fence.
It definitely is muscle memory. I've just been practicing the guitar for the first time for ages, and I was learning a new riff or a new little progression, and couldn't do it this morning. But by the end of the day, I could because I just played it lots. What this guy, Marbin Official, is his name on Instagram. What he was saying is, if someone's teaching you and they know theory, they can teach you theory. They can teach you exercises. They can teach you all of these things. If they're trying to teach you how to play an amazing solo and they've never played an amazing solo in their life, then they don't know how to play an amazing solo, and therefore they can't really teach you what it is to do the amazing solo. They can't teach you what it is to have that thing that you need to make that thing extra special. And he was saying that's what's missing. So he's saying when he first started learning music, he had a really passionate teacher who was so passionate about teaching that was what he needed at the time. But that teacher wasn't necessarily the person that could teach him to do the things that he would need to do to get better. And he was saying he's convinced that if you're really good at something, you'll be good despite your teachers. But having that brilliant teacher there would help. And coincidentally, I saw another clip with someone talking about meritocracy and teaching, and talking about the idea that they quoted a baseball player, I think it was a baseball player, that practice does not make perfect, but perfect practice makes perfect. And this idea that if you're taught you're taught in different levels, different people can teach you in different ways. And if someone's teaching you in the right way for you, that's a better way of teaching for you, or just a better way of teaching, you're going to progress much better. And I thought that seems quite logical.
But on the other, like the other side of the coin, brute force also always works in the end. Like if you brute force something, it'll work in the end, right? And to kind of give you another example, like when I was a really young guitar player, I'd always heard the phrase like visualize the fretboard, and I never understood what that meant. Like, does that mean you see like the notes on the fretboard? Like, what does that mean? And it wasn't until like in my late 40s or 50s that I could visualize the fretboard. Like I could see everything, but it wasn't a sight thing. It was like an audio thing. Like I could hear half steps and whole steps, and it's not something you can articulate, and it's not a visualizing the fretboard, but technically it's like an echolocation almost. And no one ever explained that to me, that it's your ears really that are visualizing the fretboard. And one,
I accidentally added Scott. He's ready to go. Yeah. Sorry, Scott. I just threw you in. And Eddie, I can't email you from my computer, but I've put a link in the chat if you want to join us. Basically, this is open for anyone that wants to join in. There's a link in the chat. But I might be a bit all hectic if everyone joins in now.
Sorry. I almost forgot. It was like a little after 4. I'm like, oh no! Sorry.
Scott, you look like you're a lead guitarist in a band from the early 90s.
Where's the smoke machine?
I'm in the garage. It's hot. I need the fan.
Hey, look, we did plan to have a theme today talking about inlays, and I really wanted to talk about Brad's stuff. But yeah, just one more thing about teaching. I also not sure I agree with that guy, because I definitely feel like this is from me and my arts background as a teacher as well. Got to a point where I can definitely help people improve the artwork they're making, and I know I could improve the artwork I was making, but I got to a point where I just did not care anymore about making artwork for galleries. But I really enjoyed teaching people. So maybe I could have spent time improving my artwork and become more successful with that. Probably not. But I mean, develop. But I much prefer teaching other people to do that. And it felt more rewarding. But then I started painting on guitars, and that was even less financially viable, making things for galleries. Yeah. Hey, I think we might have Eddie with us as well.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's an absolutely full house. Eddie's from Electric Lady Guitars in the UK. We've been trying to get him on for a while, but it's really hard with this time slot to get you in. But welcome, Eddie.
Hey guys.
Hey, look, if it's all right, I would like, if you don't mind, Brad, do you mind if I share some of your Instagram posts recently of some of the stuff?
Yeah, go for it, mate. Yeah, no worries.
Because we were talking about maybe having a theme to the episodes, and Brad recently, Sherry, there we go, was making these crazy inlays. So when I first saw the first thing I saw was this, and I thought it was a sketch on paper. But what can you tell us a bit about what you've been doing there, Brad?
So because it was that inlay there, that's for the Jergs Cup 2. So the theme on that was the using hardware store bought timbers. So in Australia, we have Bunnings, and they don't have a huge range of timber. But one thing that happens at Bunnings is that everyone here knows they've got a sausage sizzle out the front, and that raises for like a local charity. So everywhere has a different charity. So something synonymous with them without using their logo was the sausage in bread. So I thought, it'll make a good 12th inlay, and then I can call it a snag caster, and yeah.
That all makes sense now. Look at that. Fantastic. It all makes sense. I wasn't really sure what was going on because I obviously don't know Bunnings, didn't know that reference. And what a cool thing to do. So how have you made it? What material is it?
So it's a few different pieces of shell. So we've got a white mother of pearl. The yellow bits are actually some dyed bone that I had sitting around from Philadelphia luthier supplies, and I think the sausage was too a piece of dyed bone, and then the bread is a reconstituted stone from mother of pearl supply. So I just sort of collect odds and ends, and then that way you've got them when you need them. But usually I just use like a shell or something like that for like a basic inlay. But yeah, that all worked out well for this one. It was hard sort of getting the colours right, I guess. I wasn't, in the end, I'm not entirely wrapped about how it turned out, but it gets the point across.
Yeah, I love it. I also am a massive fan of a symbol at the 12th fret that overlaps the 11th and 13th like that. Something big.
Yeah.
Bold.
Can I ask what the process is for your inlay work?
Yep. So basically, what I would do is just find an image. If you get something that's pretty cartoony like that sausage and bread, then it's already in like a black and white image. So, or let's say it wasn't, you just sort of break it down. So you get your image and then try to turn it into a two color black and white sort of thing. And then I'll print out a whole handful of those images. So then I can cut tiny little pieces off each of those printouts, stick them to the piece of shell or whatever it is I'm inlaying, and then use that as the template to cut it out. And then I'll sort of build up from that original piece. I'll then so then I trace the next where that edge cut has been made to meet up with the next one. I'll trace that edge onto the next piece of material, and then stick the next piece of paper on top and cut. So then everything kind of meets up quite snugly. It's kind of like paint by numbers is sort of what you're trying to achieve. So you're cutting out all the little pieces for all the different colors of shell or material that you're inlaying, and then just sort of piecing them together. What I like to do with the
cutting by hand.
Yeah, cutting by hand, just with a little. I grabbed a whole heap of stuff to sort of show and tell as we go along.
So is that the same for carving the fretboard?
With the fretboard, I would just route out with a like a Dremel on like a little base, or a router with a base on that. But yeah, I would trace the outline of the inlay onto that, remove all that, and then carefully, if I have to remove a little bit more, just chisel out the edges and just remove it until when I have the final inlay, it'll fit in. And then doing the old, backfill with some sawdust and super glue around the edges there. Sometimes you get lucky and you get a nice tight finish. Other times you get a little bit of a gap around it, but so does Gibson, so it's good enough for me. But in terms of cutting,
are you scribing with a blade, or are you drawing with a very fine pencil?
Just drawing with a very fine pencil. Yeah. Okay. If I need to, what do? I can put some like chalk down first on the board and then draw on it, so you can sort of see it a little bit easier.
Okay.
Because a lot of the boards I use being dark, it is quite hard to see that grey lead on there, especially once you put a base over the top and you can't see your line. Or I will just with like a white wax pen, just sort of scribble right up to the edge of the template, so then you can see just the white sort of silhouette. And then that way, you know, if you've still got a little bit of duck timber on the inside of that silhouette, you've still got a little bit more to remove there. That's probably the easiest visually, but sometimes gives a bit of a sloppier a finish. Yeah.
Sorry for
But,
interrupting you, but it's my
no,
weakest part of luthiery, so I just want to know all the tricks.
yeah. I've actually got, and I'll flick the link now to it. I've got a playlist that I made to share with people when they're asking me about it. I'll flick it to Daniel now, and then he can link it to everyone. It's a playlist with videos on it from now their names. So we've got Stew Mac had a 3-piece series on it. Of course, Ben Crow had a good series on some inlay pieces that were specifically covering this sort of thing of, you know, breaking it down in paint by numbers. And who are the two blokes? Not Highline, Driftwood.
Driftwood. Oh yeah, they're
Driftwood guitars. Had an amazing video in this playlist too. It's like 40 minutes long, and they break down every little piece of it. And the way they talk about it, all three different series in that playlist, just makes it seem like a really simple and achievable task. A lot of people are looking at the bigger picture at the end, and you know, if you've got time and patience, then it's fine. But yeah, breaking it down into bite-sized pieces and taking it that way is definitely the key to doing it. Especially on something like, I did like a battle axe for a friend on one of his guitars, and I think I had like 8 hours in that alone, just cutting the little pieces and all that sort of thing. So yeah,
I'm not sure I have the patience to do a hand cut one like that.
Yeah, you just kind of get lost in doing it, and you don't really sort of realize how long you've been sitting there cutting away at things, and it becomes like a bit of a challenge to yourself, a bit of a hunt in, you know, like, okay, I've got to get this piece to fit the next one, and you know, you know, because you're trying to achieve that, you know, you sort of get more eager to get onto the next piece. Yeah.
So
but in terms of cutting,
straight up
marquetry.
Yeah.
Is that? Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. But you know, you're cutting with, you know, like the little, it's just a little jeweler's saw with that tiny little blade on there. And then if you're trying to touch up edges, I just use, you know, those little files you get like 10 in a set for like $5 from the hardware store or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Those are great for just touching up the edges and removing any of the tooling marks, and then you brush it back with sandpaper and stuff. But you get like those little coping saws and the blades. You pick them up from jewelers, hobby stores, and that sort of thing online. So yeah, that took me a while to be able to actually find online. You know, where do you get that from? But yeah, so the hot tip there is for jewelers, supplies.
Hey, that link you're going to send me or have sent me, I'll put it in the chat, not the chat, the comment thread on the video, so people watching later can see it there, so it won't be in the
Yeah. The videos, they're quite long, and they can sort of maybe be a little bit dry, but if it's something that you're genuinely interested in doing, between the 3 different video series on there, you should be pretty full bottle on it by the time you've watched them. They all do a really good job of explaining how to do it, and having the visual there makes it a bit easier.
Hey, that feels like the traditional way to do it. Do you mind, Scott, if I share a picture of one of your guitars? You can tell us how you do your bonehead in the middle of it all.
Well, depends on if you're talking about the actual logo, the bonehead logo, and not the 12th fret.
I was talking about the 12th fret one. Is what I was thinking of.
Okay, well, there are 2 inlays that I normally do. I'll always do the bonehead logo in the head, and the bone in the 12th fret, unless somebody wants something different on the 12th fret. And you know, sometimes I'll do something different. But if it's just for me, or if nobody specifies, then I'll do the bone. And it's gone through quite a bit of evolution. The bone these days, I will or 3D print an outline, and I've actually finally made a jig that I can. It's terrifying to use because it's a stack of about 2 inches of MDF that a 1/4-inch bit will just barely fit into. So my heart skips a beat every time I actually do it, but it always turns out all right. But anyway, for the 12th fret these days, like I said, I'll 3D print the outline. I have a jig that I can route the actual cavity, and then I've started going ahead and filling that outline with dyed resin before I will actually place it in there. So that one's kind of foolproof these days. It's kind of been mechanized to the point where there's not a whole lot of skill involved with that. The logo and the headstock, I do that one always by hand, and it's usually maple. And I need a scalpel and a magnifying glass these days. I have a sheet of just printed logos, and I'll just cut one out and tape it onto a piece of maple, and I usually cut the outline out, and then with scalpel blade, the hole in the D and things like that, the negative space, I will slowly pry out with a knife, and then I have a little triangle file that I will do the separation between the letters. And then when it's done, I'll take like walnut wood filler and just smear that in there, and then sand the top off. I'm kind of proud of the logo. The bone looks cool, but there's not that much skill involved these days. But the logo, I've always been kind of proud of.
I'll tell you what, Scott, to have something that makes people instantly smile, you can't put a value on that. You look at your logo and you instantly smile.
But I'm glad to hear that, because I've never heard too many people say much about it. A lot of people have commented on the bone, but the logo takes work. I don't look forward to doing it, but I'm always happy when I'm done. Yeah.
And what about consistency?
I've gotten to where it's fairly consistent these days. When I was doing the bone by hand, I would just sit down and try to draw it to vague dimensions of the 12th fret, and it's not a good way to do it. But since I've got this sheet, and God help me if I ever someday run out of the printed logos on that sheet, I'll be lost. I don't know where the file is. But since I go off of that, it's relatively consistent, but it's still handmade. And I think if you looked at individual ones, you could definitely see a difference between them.
I watched the driftwood video. I mean, the driftwood guitars are amazing, elaborate inlay work. But I saw the video where the driftwood guys compared their kind of like hand inlay work with a laser inlay work. So they got their hands on a laser. They lasered out the wooden veneers, and they kind of put them together. And it's exactly like Brad said. It's kind of like paint by numbers, but you have all these finely, intricately lasered pieces that you can kind of put together and sit together like paint by numbers. And it's a far easier strategy than doing it by hand. And I have some experience with that. So the laser is a nice way to do this because there's no kerf on the laser, right? The kerf is like 0.01 or something, right? So you get these perfectly intricate designs, and you can get pointy, where things where a chisel couldn't get to, like maybe a scalpel could, but it's even thinner than a scalpel. So you can get very elaborate designs with laser. And then I've done the thing where I put the fretboard in the laser to actually hollow out, the negative. And I use Lightroom for that because in Lightroom you can stack your operations. So you can do something like a 45-degree pass, and then the opposite 45-degree pass, and then do an outline, and you get this perfect outline of the actual inlay. And again, you don't have to worry about a kerf. I never compensate, for the offset. I just put the actual inlay in there and glue it in, and good to go. So I think lasers are a great way, but you're kind of confined to wood because lasers cut wood very well. They can't cut shell, right? They can cut acrylic, but you're kind of stuck with those kind of soft materials. I've tried cutting shell, it's impossible. I tried mother of pearl, it's impossible. At least on my diode
What's-
laser.
What happens with the shell? Does it just bounce the laser off, or it just won't cut?
Like I have a hobby laser, so it's a diode laser, right? So it's using heat to vaporize material, and so it's just not hot enough to vaporize the shell. Maybe if you had like a fiber laser that could like cut through it because it's a different wavelength. I have no experience with that. But yeah, so like for example, if I'm cutting like really thin pieces of I don't know, aluminum or something, it's so hot that it warps the aluminum. Even in acrylic, it'll like warp the acrylic because it's using heat.
Okay.
Well, can I just quickly ask a technical question? You said you use a light room. What does that mean?
Light burn.
Oh, a light burn. Sorry. Okay. That makes sense. Hey, Scott, I just want to say about your using the 3D printer to make the shape that you then pour the resin in. It's such a genius idea. I think.
I was a little concerned because I mean I'm doing PLA and I didn't know how well that material would stand up, in that situation, even though it's a thin little outline. But and that stuff does not sand very well at all. But it's kind of been all right. I mean, I've done several of them now, and it seems to be okay.
I guess once the resin's in it as well, you've got that main area's resin pushing against the plastic, against the wood. Must be pretty sturdy in there.
I'm not sure.
Logical, but sorry. Go on, Scott.
I was just thinking something stupid out loud. I'm not sure I'd be willing to try it, but you could you can soften PLA with some heat pretty easy. So it might be possible once it's actually in there to, pull the PLA back out and then put in another. I don't know. Maybe that's a dumb idea.
Seems a pretty basic question, but is everybody inlaying prior to the fretboard being radius? Or are some people doing it after the fact? Because all of a sudden the client has requested something different.
I like to radius first, so then if in the event I am, maybe I stuff up doing the radiusing or something with the block and I get a little bit too low in one spot and I've got to finesse it a bit more. I don't want the inlay already in there, and then maybe I'll burn through that. It's all you have to do when you already have the radius on there is just have either some sort of jig that you can set the your router base up a little bit higher off, and then route out your inlay that way. If you're confident that you're not going to do any damage to the inlay, then doing it flat is definitely going to be easier and less jigs, that sort of thing. But for me, I like to radius first.
I would think if you're doing something intricate and small and pretty and delicate, you would probably almost have to do it that way.
Yeah, because how thick are your pieces?
They're like 1.3 to 1.5 mil.
Yeah.
So if you've got a flat radius, like if you're like a more modern flat radius, you got heaps of leeway. But if you're doing like a 9, 10, 12, those bits of shell can get quite thin, especially if you're doing a really wide inlay. As it gets to those outer edges, the whatever piece you use is getting quite thin by there, and it can become a little bit transparent. So it might ruin the effect of it, but about 1.5 mil.
I do a pre-radius. So if I'm on the CNC, I buy those, I guess they're mother of pearl round inlays, and they're 3 millimeters thick, and I think they're 3 millimeters in diameter. And so it'll be a flat fretboard. I mill the actual 3 mil dot, stick them in, and then I radius. And I like that because then my inlay has the radius also. Yeah.
So what I would normally do is do the inlay, but then just sand it back with a radius block, so you get the matched radius, and you're just being careful not to add any additional sanding to the fretboard itself. But something like a dot, definitely just do it flat. Keep everything square so you can do it on the drill press, and
But if you're doing something like shell, the shell is harder than the fretboard. So do you have issues when you're sanding?
I just go to a much shorter block, and then I just you just pay a little bit more attention to what it is you're doing exactly. if it's going to give you issue, then just use a really tiny little square block just to bring it back down, and then go to the bigger overall radius block and sand that back. But that's probably, here we go. That's a piece of like brown.
Is it abalone? What's
That is, yeah, it's like a abalone or something, but
it's thin.
it's hard. Just
Yeah,
yeah.
it's thin.
So, but that gives you an idea of what you're dealing with. Can't quite get the color showing represented on it, but it's brown mother of pearl, that one. Yeah.
I've got to say, I've done a lot of inlays where I've customized a guitar that exists and literally drilled out the dots, put new things in, often pouring resin into the hole that I make. And I do that, obviously, with a guitar that's already radius. And I also often do it with the frets on. And you just got to be really careful with the resin. Try not to get it too high, but I always dome it up a bit. And then when it's dry, I use a scalpel blade scalpel blade to sort of scrape it back, trying to get it level with the fretboard without damaging the fretboard. Then go in very lightly with sandpaper. I am potentially going to change the radius very slightly in the middle doing that, but I mean, it's not gonna
no one's going to notice that. No one's going to feel that, like, unless they're really grabbing on their fretboard and trying to push their finger to it.
Yeah.
That just gave me an idea, Daniel. You know those metal radius gauges? They're like a stock, and then they have the thing. Couldn't you take one of those and put a burr on it and use it as a scraper? You know what I'm talking about? Those radius gauges? They're metal. Any metal radius gauge. Couldn't you kind of put a burr on that?
Oh yeah.
I do that. I put 2 or 3 together the same radius.
Yeah.
Put sandpaper on the underside, and that's what I do.
That's a good idea. I've got these little things. That
The one that Brad has is metal. Couldn't you put
just
like
for
So like
visual
then it would
people
become like
following
a
along.
cabinet scraper essentially. Oh, I missed you holding it up.
Sorry.
Yeah, there's a
Nice.
cabinet scraper. Basically, if you put a burr on it, you can get in between those tiny little frets.
Yeah, or as Eddie's saying, a couple of these with like a
Sandpaper.
a bit wider and thicker, and put sandpaper on it.
Nice, great ideas.
Yeah,
There we go.
I like
Look at
that
that.
idea.
So those are all the same gauge because they were cheap. So why not? And I'll just put a bit of whatever gauge grit I want under there that's suitable. And you go right up to the edge of the fret with that. Quite nicely.
Clever.
Brilliant. I've changed the way I'm doing it now. Thank you. I'm going to try both, but I think I feel more confident with the sandpaper. That's a great idea.
I think the sandpaper idea would probably work a little bit better, because you could even 3D print like this, but then have like a larger center section just there if you're just doing little things in the middle, so you can actually get a decent bit of sandpaper on there.
Yeah, this needs to be thicker to not bend.
Yeah.
So much. But the one thing I would say about sanding an existing fretboard is, even if you then finish it with some sort of wax or protective oil, I definitely notice the difference between the ones that have been sanded and haven't. So when I upgrade the fret dots, I always lightly sand the entire fretboard and then re-oil it. So there's another thing actually with fretboard markers that I do a lot, because I paint fretboards a lot. Just think about the fact you have a maple fretboard and it's got a clear coat on the top. It's basically the same thing. I put colour on and then clear coat it. So I often use water slide decals to make complicated images that I can then print onto it. So for example, one of the things I like to do is the decal be black with transparent areas on it, and I'll spray the neck first. Say one of the things I haven't got one here, have I? No. Sometimes I put gold leaf on the fretboards, then put the decal over the top, and the gold shines through the gaps in the black, and then I seal it all in. Totally cheating, but it looks good.
What's really encouraging is hearing the fact that you all take pride in your work. I've got a young lad that I've just taken on for teaching to build, and I thought a good introduction would be a kit guitar. So he's bought this kit, but the amount of work it's needed on it to bring it up to spec is unreal. But just the classic sort of square pearloid abalone markers on the fretboard, the fretboard's radius, but the markers are flat. And it's just the feel of the neck is horrible. But what a small detail.
Do you mind revealing what make it was from? Or is that you want to keep it quiet?
I'd have to go and look it up. It's not information I've retained out of disgust.
Because I've got to
say, what a small detail to get right. You know what I mean? All they got to do is make it a bit thicker and just radius it. Never mind. My hobby horse.
No, because I always hark back to what Mark says, that a CNC does the same thing wherever you are. So I'm now always surprised when you get a kit guitar and it's not up to spec, because there's no reason why it shouldn't be, maybe not finished perfectly, but there's no reason why it shouldn't all fit together properly or have bits made in the right way.
Setting up a factory to produce guitars, at the end of the day, it comes down to the wood choices, because once you've made your first batch of guitars and you've isolated where the faults are, then you micro adjust your machinery to compensate. And once you've done that, it's just a question of how quickly the bearings wear out on the machinery. You know, so really, once you've thought about it and set it up, then you shouldn't need to think about it. But there seems these errors still keep creeping in.
Yeah, there's even the idea of like your end mills wearing out. So if you have like a 1/4-inch end mill, eventually it wears out and becomes smaller. So now your tool paths are off, right? Yeah. And if they're not changing their bits, then you can have some materials that basically just aren't up to spec.
Yeah. And how many of them are not guitar players that are making guitars? That's the other element, isn't it?
Yeah. I wonder. I was about to say, I wonder how much of it is then put in by hand. I have shared previously. I can't dig it out now because I'm not sure where it is. But I started following an Instagram channel that was showing behind the scenes of how things are made in big factories in various parts of the world, and just seeing the guitars in the guitar factory was really interesting, because I assumed it would just be a production line where everything looks the same, but it was the main footage that they were showing was the sort of room where things are finally put together and assembled, and it was just stacks and stacks of different looking guitars. So things were being brought into the room, people were finishing the frets, people were bolting the necks on, people were tuning them up, people were checking that the frets don't fret out too much. But it was just a total mix. So presumably the factory is producing batches that are quite big, but then once it gets to the finishing stage, it's going through some sort of other system on the floor, going backwards and forwards, and that before it gets to the quality control, I guess is that what that room was. It's just interesting. I just kind of assumed it would be maybe they do a month of Fender Strats, a month of Les Pauls or whatever, and swap the machines round, but it didn't seem to be like that.
I don't think any of those factories are equal. I think we had this conversation with like American made instruments, right, Daniel? So like it just depends on how much you're willing to pay. That's how much more quality you're getting and the control. So even though there may be, there's a bunch of factories overseas, like they're not all the same.
No, but there was this woman that was doing the checking the frets plate. She was basically shredding up the fretboard, just doing like an exercise of playing every single fret really fast. But I was super impressive. But whether that's the best way to test that your fretboard really works properly, I don't think so. Because I used to do that, just check playing every note, but then you're not checking bending every note. And there's all these other things that need to be checked about, not just if the note plays when you hold the note down. I don't know.
So coming back to inlay work, particularly thinking of fretboards more than headstocks, are there woods to avoid?
I wouldn't think so. As long as you can cut through. I mean, you're cutting if you can cut the slots in it, then your router piece is going to be able to cut into the timber. As with all things, routing, you just take shallow passes and work your way through it. I can't imagine why there would be a timber not to use.
I've just invested in one of these from Stew Mac.
Yeah,
the base for the Dremel, and it's the easiest I've ever done the slot. For the strap type pickup selector, the switch.
Mm-hmm.
So you got the 2 screw holes in the slot that runs between them. That's the quickest and easiest I've ever done that. Which I tried.
You've got a good visual on that plate too.
Yeah.
Did you run it against something? Did you use a guide when you did that, Eddie? Or was it you just?
No, actually, I just took with a 1.5 millimeter bit. I just did it by eye, really, really slowly and carefully. But you got really good vision with that cutaway there, compared to the other base I had, where I did have to run it against an edge.
Yeah, I think maybe that's the issue I had, because I used to. So I said I'd drill holes out, fill them with resin. I also used to use a Dremel to cut shapes out, and I use the Dremel bases, and they're not as great. Like you can see into the base, but it was all quite shadowy. I had to jig one up with a little torch on it, and it just wasn't so great. And then I used their plunger outer base for the Dremel, and it looks like the Stew Mac one, but made of plastic and like 5 times as bulky, so it wasn't as good. And I was never sure, and still haven't, gone all in and bought the sort of expensive metal thing that Stew Mac sell. But it sounds like it's worth it.
It's well worth it. It's yeah.
I had a nice batch of tree surgery, so I treated myself.
Oh, for people that don't know, Eddie chops down trees, collects wood and sells the wood on, and makes guitars out of the wood that you've harvested yourself.
That's awesome.
Am I describing that incorrectly there? I missed something out.
No, that's fine. But just my latest project, which I might show you in a bit, is I don't know. You got a short one tonight, didn't you? But I'm doing what I call the Reaper series, which is a play on repurposed. So at the minute, I'm converting some mahogany coffee tables and dinner tables into some nice looking guitars. So the tables already have a very decorative veneer on top, so I'm just utilizing that as a decorative top. So I didn't cut those trees down.
No. I like the idea, though, of the repurposing. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent now. I had a chat with someone online, or like a heated discussion about the cost of selling guitars, and it was sort of about how you value an instrument, and part of it was I was saying the playability is part of the value, right? So if you, for example, get a cheap, because I'm making a series at the moment where I'm repurposing old guitars, and essentially it's part casters, bits of guitars, bits of hardware that have been taken off of other guitars and put on a new one. And I was saying, if you take a guitar that's had a bit of use, or is a cheap guitar, and you do a great setup on it, you can really improve that instrument. And I was trying to say that if you buy a cheap guitar and pay for a setup, isn't that, and you're happy to do that, and it makes it play better, then couldn't I just say, here's a cheap guitar I've done a setup on, and it's the same cost as the cheap guitar plus the setup? Would that work? And they were just getting really angry with this idea. And it got me to thinking, how are they valuing it by the cost of parts? So if you're using a mahogany table, how would you value that? Do you value that at the cost of the mahogany if you're buying new mahogany? Do you say, oh, well, you're just using an old table that you found, so it's not worth anything? It shouldn't affect the value of the guitar, I don't think.
Well, it's 1940s table, so it's Brazilian mahogany, which of course you can't get anymore. So as long as I prove that the origin is from this table, so I have to preserve some of the wood as a table, or a section of the table, then I should get away with commercially selling them.
See, I think it adds to the story of it. And I think if I was buying a guitar, forgetting tone wood, if I was buying a guitar, I wouldn't worry about where the wood came from initially as to, or what wood it was, even if it's a painted finished guitar. I would worry about what it looks like and what it plays like. And then if you found out this extra thing, to me, that's a selling point that you're repurposing wood instead of chopping down new trees. That's brilliant.
The other week you were talking amongst yourselves about what's the best kind of guitar for a youngster to have. And I think I commented to you, didn't I, that the main thing is the neck. You can bolt a neck to a wheelbarrow and you'll have a guitar. And, you know, you can get a cheap body, but as long as you've got a good neck on it, whether it's one that you've, and you know, sort of improved upon, shall we say, you know, or whether it's one you've made to go on a cheap body, they can mess around with the body as much as they like, and they can tweak their choices for the future and come back to you, you know, as a client. But the main thing is, when we all started playing these awful guitars with action so high and the intonation non-existent, and that's how a lot of famous people actually started, on these horrible cheap guitars. I'm not for that at all. I think the sooner you can introduce these young kids to a really good playable neck, the more they're going to advance, the more it's going to advance our cause as guitar makers.
Yeah.
And we're just going to get known for someone that puts an input into the young ones, you know?
Well,
I'd have to say that there's nothing more frustrating when you're first learning to play than, you know, notes that would buzz and choke out. And, you know, part of that is, you know, your technique and you're learning not to do that. But if the guitar was doing that and you didn't know how to try to work your way around that, you know, that's a, you know, cause for most kids to just chuck in the towel and be like, I can't make this work. I'm off it. So
If
to have
it's
that
not-
playable neck straight up.
Yeah. If it's not fun to play, you're not going to play. And for it to be fun to play, it needs to sound good and it needs to feel good. And it's just that simple. And I think we take for granted as boutique builders that we've nailed that. And I hope we have. I still worry about it. But consistently making something that is super playable but also sounds good. And then all this other stuff is just to make it pretty.
Yeah.
I had a client sort of very shyly ring me up a few months ago and said the guitar isn't playing as well as it should. And when he brought it to me, he did confess he's a builder, and he left it in a guitar case in the back of his van all winter.
Oh,
So I do what I normally do when this happens, is I put it in my dry room and I don't touch it for 3 weeks, and it plays fine.
There you go.
wow.
You know?
Maybe this is maybe someone like that needs a plastic guitar. We'll have to get
No, a concrete guitar.
concrete guitar. Well, because the Ray with the plastic might walk. We're hoping to get Ray from Tasmaniac on soon to talk about some plastic guitars. So we're there. Look,
Listen, guys, I got to sign off now, but I'd love to come back on another time because I'm full of questions.
that's brilliant. Look, I was going to say we try and finish it off about 45 minutes. So that's perfect. And Eddie, you're always welcome. Anyone that's watching that's been on before or is interested in joining, just send me a message. I can send you links. Just a rotation around, as we say, like a 45-minute pub chat about things. So thank you, Eddie. And also, we'll wind up here then. So thank you as well, Brad. It was great to see you again. Hopefully get you back soon as well.
Yep. Will do.
Mark, have a great rest of your afternoon. And everyone else in the UK, good night.
Thanks for the community.
See you all later.
See ya.
Thanks,
Yep.
Eddie.